Good evening. You're on the smoking section. My name's Steve Helfer, and welcome as I advocate for the rights of smokers to enjoy themselves and to be left alone and to be some kind of real, let's say, there's just so much faulty information out there that it really is not good. And so this program, as you all know, we try to get some accurate information about smoking and about tobacco, and that's what we're here for. And one of the things that I thought this week that was particularly interesting is that there was a study that came out recently, and this is a major study, huge study actually, and it was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And of course, I think one has to view all of these things with a grain of salt, but this was something that I thought was worthy of our attention, and that was that new findings published in the Journal of the American Medical Association just about a week ago of a huge study done at the Cleveland Clinic, which is, of course, a very, very large hospital, very much prestigious, something like Massachusetts General Hospital, but a study that was done. It appears to me that this study was what's called a prospective study between 1991 and 2014. Of course, the article, which is from Time magazine, does not tell us if it's prospective or not, which means a prospective study is a study that starts and then goes forward. So it starts in 2009. It starts in 1991. And tracks people going forward rather than starting kind of in 2014, which was the end of the study, and looking backward. And it was done with treadmill testing, evidently testing people's physical fitness. And according to this study, of these 122,000 people involved, those people who were physically fit tended to have the greatest survival and benefit in good health, which is not surprising, although physical fitness doesn't mean everything. There are people who physically fit and die young, and people who are not physically fit and live into very old age. I mean, for example, I can think of Winston Churchill lived into his at least until 90, and he must have not been in very, very good shape at all, where the classic example of Jim Fixx, who was a runner, died at the age of 50. But what the lead researcher found, and what he's told CNN, according to this article in Time magazine, being unfit on a treadmill or in an exercise stress test has a worse prognosis as far as death than being a current smoker. So that is yet another example, this one being a large scientific study, that whether one smokes or not is not the only thing that matter. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people who smoke may also not be people who are kind of taking care of their physical fitness. So if they don't do well in terms of longevity or good health, it may in fact have nothing to do with their smoking. It may have everything to do with the fact that they don't get any exercise, and that being out of shape is a more of a predictor of early death than smoking. So for all those people who don't smoke, but aren't in good shape and think that, well, they're doing the right thing, this study brings into question. And for all those people who smoke, I would say, and think that they're doing something terrible for their health, well, if they would exercise a bit, they may do just fine, even compared with non-smokers who don't exercise. Now, just for an example of that, I'm going to go to our smoker of the week this year, or this week, obviously, and let me see, get him up. And this is our smoker of the week, and he is a well-known Massachusetts novelist by the name of Ward Just, and he lives in Martha's Vineyard. In recent interview with him, he said that Martha's Vineyard being so hoity-toity, people, it's almost as if smoking is prohibited on the island. And not actually, but in fact, so very few people smoke. Well, Ward Just, in this photo, is 68 years old, but he is now 78. And according to this article from marthasvineyardmagazine.com, he's still enjoying his Camel's non-filters. Although he is no longer a chain smoker, at the age of 78, he is still smoking, and he tends, for some reason, to light his cigarettes on the gas stove of his apartment or his home there, leaning his face over to get close enough to the flame and then inhaling deeply. Recently, again, this article that I'm talking about is from Time Magazine, so it was written in 2014. Mr. Just has written his, his 18th book, 18th novel called An American Romantic. And I think it's interesting to note how many writers are and have been smokers. One man who wrote an entire book about tobacco, in praise of tobacco, said that tobacco was the handmaiden of literature. And I think Ward Just has written 19 novels, has been a smoker of Camel non-filters, I assume, for many, many, many years. And at the time of this writing, which was 2014, he evidently was going very strong, continuing to smoke at the age of 78. So for those people who worry and take so much for literally that smoking is lethal, I would say this is just another example, another of many examples, people who have smoked for many, many years and live healthfully into very old age and sometimes advanced very old age. So, and I also think there are other factors, many other factors, which influence that. One of which being that if you are productive and interested and creative, as Mr. Just is, you will do better than somebody who really does not have any kinds of interests in life. Now, there's a very well-known, this goes way back in history, and I was recently talking on Facebook with someone, or commenting on Facebook, exactly what about the evidence that smoking causes lung cancer. And in the late 50s and early 60s, there were still many well-respected physicians, statisticians, researchers who really questioned a lot of the research that was being done. And one of those persons was a man named Joseph Berkson, I think, who had worked for the American Cancer Society. He was very highly thought of, a man beyond reproach, and really a giant in the field of medical research. And he delivered a paper at the Mayo Clinic in 1959, and he said some things before he delivered the paper that I thought were very, very interesting, and I am going to quote them, read them exactly as he wrote them, or almost exactly as he wrote them. According to innumerable accounts published in newspapers, magazines, and some scientific periodicals of England and the United States, it has been conclusively established that smoking is an important cause of lung cancer. So firmly and even fanatically is this opinion held in some quarters that to question it is to court the charge of being biased, surreptitiously a partisan of the interests of the tobacco industry, indecisive where action is wanted, an obstructor of scientific and medical progress, are simply obstreperous. Such attacks are not pleasant to receive, as I know from personal experience, but they are not fatal. So I survive to appear before your society, privileged with the opportunity to present some reasons for doubting this conclusion. I think this really is a very interesting statement that Dr. Berkson makes, particularly because at this point in time, which is now almost 70 years later, that's 1960, so it's 40, 20, 60 years later, everybody thinks that smoking being a cause of lung cancer has been firmly established. But just as now, just as then, really it was open to question. And I mean, if you look at this statement, for example, as early as 1959, innumerable articles in newspapers and some scientific journals Dr. Berkson refers to. What happened was, from an historical point of view, is that there were several studies done, not many studies, very few studies, several studies done. They were very crude studies. They were done by very biased researchers. It was not a lot of studies done to show a correlation between lung cancer and smoking. But because there was so much media attention given to it, it was such a big story, a story that had legs, people kind of assumed that there were many studies, but there were really very few studies, and they weren't very sound studies. In fact, right up until this day, I don't know how many studies have been done that purport to show that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. And as a matter of fact, even to the present day, there is no explanation for how cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. The cause is really unknown. All these studies have been able to show is that more cigarette smokers get lung cancer than non-smokers. And that's called an observational study, and there could be a lot of different causes for it, because are cigarette smokers the same as non-smokers? Could cigarette smokers be people who perhaps have less money, work in more dangerous places, and all that, and that sort of stuff, so that really you don't know if cigarette smokers, you can't isolate the cause, and that's why, for example, between 1960 and the year 2000, almost all medical professionals believed that hormone replacement therapy was something that they should recommend to all women past a certain age, past the age of menopause, because they had observed that women who took hormone replacement therapy had fewer incidences of breast cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's disease. So this was, but this was all based on observational studies. This was nothing that was randomized. Then in 2000, there was a randomized study done, and it found that women who took hormone replacement therapy as opposed to women who didn't take hormone replacement therapy were much more likely to get those specific diseases that were supposedly one was protected against, and so that the medical profession admitted that they had been wrong, that their 40 years of insistence that they had the evidence, because it was based on observational studies, was weak. And when it finally did a randomized study, they found that hormone replacement therapy was anything but something to advise women to take. So there has never been a randomized study of smoking. We've only compared observationally those people who smoke with those people who don't smoke. In addition, they have never been able to get animals to get lung cancer from smoking. There have been many, many tries at that, not so much in recent years because they've given up. They really cannot get animals to get lung cancer. So, and that's why an animal study is very similar to a randomized study, because you can take animals and who are living exactly the same ways, eating exactly the same foods, exactly the same species, and you can take one specific factor and expose them to this one factor, and then you can determine, well, this must be the cause. Whereas when you take an observational study and you're just observing large groups of people, their behavior may be so different in so many ways that unless you do a randomized study where you assign people, you people smoke, you people don't smoke, and then you see what happens. So there are many reasons to question this lung cancer cigarette smoking hypothesis. But it's also interesting that Dr. Bergson points out that so firmly and even fanatically is this opinion held in some quarters that to question it is to court the charge of being surreptitiously a partisan of the tobacco industry. And there has been I can't think of any area of research where anybody associated with, no matter how eminent in their profession as a researcher, if they are associated with the tobacco industry, they're people who don't agree with them. People will impugn their character and say, oh, well, they're just being paid off by the tobacco industry, and they are changing their scientific beliefs to suit their pocketbook, so to speak. And I think this is a very scurrilous way of disputing something. People have this idea that in the field of science, that scientists welcome criticisms of their hypotheses and that they will just kind of iron it out. But that really is not the way it works. Scientists are very thin-skinned. And if anybody questions one of their hypothesis, very often, especially if it's something that can influence public policy or can be at all controversial, scientists will, the first way that they will do it will be to impugn the motives of whoever it is that criticizes them. So I think that this is very interesting because Bergson says that even to question it, and this was as early as 1959, when in retrospect, even anyone would have to say that there really was very little evidence at this point. Yet, many in the medical profession not only chose to believe it fanatically, but to accuse anybody who questioned this theory as being a pawn or a toad of the tobacco companies. But there are many other reasons to question the lung cancer smoking hypothesis. One thing that they would always say is that the rate of lung cancer went up as smoking rates increased. But in the early part of the 20th century, but one reason that lung cancer increased was because of better diagnostics. Before 1900 and in the early part of the 20th century, many cases which may have been lung cancer were thought to be tuberculosis. So, as the early part of the 20th century, as smoking rates increased, so did lung cancer because better diagnostics came about and people were living longer. So just as smoking increased, life expectancy increased also, and lung cancer increased. So that there are just so many holes in this theory that I'm not saying that there is no evidence, but I'm saying that people can question it and not be considered to be foolish. And I think there are a lot of things, particularly in our day and age, which are now being held to be that if you question them, you are attacked viciously. One thing on a subject that having nothing to do with tobacco, but again, something that I did talk with Ken Thomas on the show before, was the idea of misandry, which is the hatred of men. We often hear the word misogyny, which is supposedly the hatred of women, and that's very, very common. We never hear about the hatred of men, and or perhaps the maltreatment of men or the discrimination against men. And I know that in Cambridge there is a law, an ordinance, that forbids any public institution like a library, like the library, from discriminating against people on the basis of their gender identity. So if someone identifies as a male or someone identifies as a female, he or she should not be discriminated against in educational programs and the like. However, the Cambridge Public Library hosts a program, a national program called Girls Who Code, which says very clearly that it's open only to teenagers who identify as female. So it is not open to teenagers, be they cisgender or transgender teenagers who identify as male, and it's not open to those teenagers who may not identify in a binary way. I brought this up with the library authorities, and they say it is legal and that it has gone through the legal department in the city of Cambridge, but why that should be legal when it's so clear that you're not supposed to discriminate on the basis of gender. And I know that there are no programs at the Cambridge Library that exclude girls, but this program, which is highly touted, excludes boys. So this is something else, not related to tobacco, but related to people holding very fanatical views and saying that, for example, They don't believe in gender discrimination, yet in practicing it very clearly here at the Cambridge Public Library. Not something that we talk about often on the smoking section, but sometimes we touch on other issues like I know that, for example, Vice President Mike Pence spoke very clearly and very eloquently about tobacco and what was happening to smokers. And Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights takes no sides in partisan, but if a politician from the Democrats or from the Republicans or in between happens to speak truthfully about tobacco, we will bring that to the attention of our viewers, and we will laud that. Well, thanks for watching the smoking section. My name